Today we're talking about the back leg. If you want to throw in the mid-90s and beyond, you need to have an elite back leg. But here's the thing, I'm not gonna just give you the generic advice of drop and drive, push off the rubber, or load into your back leg, because that's just not what you need. What you need are the underlying principles of what makes an elite back leg and how you can implement that into your training today. By the way, I'm Josh Guest and I co-founded the Pitcher Lab. I played 7 years of professional baseball where I got up to 98 miles an hour, and now I'm training to throw 100 miles an hour, so I think about this stuff all day. So I'm not gonna waste your time, let's get straight into the video. All right, so what do the studies say about an elite back leg? Well, I looked at the force plate data. We actually have a force plate expert on our team at the Pitcher Lab, and what he told me was that the best back legs minimize the amount of Y force that is happening. So Y force is force going this way, okay? And so if you have too much force going this way on your back leg, then it means you have too much force in your toes, okay? Or if you have too much force this way, then you have too much on your heel. You want to be neutral with the back foot and the back leg, okay? Especially when you're going down the mountain. What he also told me was that the best back legs are putting the most X force, so going that way, right? Pushing this way, and also down, which is the Z force, okay? And I know that's complicated, so I'm gonna summarize it for you. So, okay, you wanna have all your center of mass on a neutral foot, right? So that it's not tilted either way. And as you're going down the mound, you wanna put a tremendous amount of force towards second base and into the ground. Okay, studies have showed that the best back legs have the best impulse as well, which means putting the most amount of force for the longest amount of time. So that's what I'm gonna dive into. How do we actually put more X and Z force into the ground so that we increase pitching velocity? Okay, so the first way to put more force into the Z and Y direction is to feel an impulse in the back leg. Now, I know you've been told, oh, you know, drift, drop. It's very common these days. You just want to drop into your back leg and rotate like this, and like, you know, you get that dead leg feeling, right? And I did that as well. When I would lift my leg, I would drop and just rotate, and I felt like I had nothing coming from the back leg. It was a very dead back leg. There was no energy propelling me forward. There was no force that I was putting into the ground, right? That's just not what we want, because we want a lot of force going this way and a lot of force going into the ground. Okay, so we want to feel more of an impulse. And so what is an impulse? It's you putting a lot of energy into the ground pushes back up and it's propelling you forward, rather than what a lot of people tell you these days is to drop and rotate, where there's nothing coming from the back leg, okay? Now, this is very different to an active push, like a triple extension. That's just not what we want to do. It's more about putting force into the ground here, right? And then that is propelling us forward. It's not an active drive like that, because that'll mess up all kinds of stuff down the line. And at any time, if you have questions about your back leg and what you need to do to fix it, you can book a call with me below and we can talk about it. So when you get this impulse right, you get guys like Shane McClanahan or Spencer Strider, who they look like they're jumping down the mound, but what they're actually doing is they're putting so much force into the ground that it's actually propelling them forward, okay? And so I want to tell you a quick story about one of our athletes who had this issue, right? And what he was doing was he didn't get any type of impulse out of the back leg, and how he moved down the mound was very tall and full. Like he would be leg lift, and then he would just fall down the mound, right? There was no type of like load into the back leg. There was no Z force, right? Going into the ground. There was no force going this way either. It was a very dead back leg. We weren't getting much out of it. One of the big fixes that we made with him was to adjust foot pressure. Okay, so now we're going more the outside of the foot to put all the pressure. And now what he's doing is he's able to load into that back leg better to get that impulse to propel him forward. Rather than previously he had all of his force on the inside of his back leg, and now what he would do is he would just roll, okay? He wouldn't get much out of that back leg. As soon as he incorporated some more ground forces, he went from being a mid-80s guy to an upper 80s guy seemingly overnight. Okay, so now we know we need to put a lot of force into the ground and back, okay? But one of the biggest mistakes that pitchers make is that they think, okay, I need to put force into the ground. How do I do that? Well, I'm gonna do that by getting into my quad, right? And pushing into my quad, sticking out your knee like this, and just getting straight into that quad, right? What we actually wanna do is to get into this back hit. And I know you've been told multiple times to get into this back glute, right? But it's very confusing. Like, no one actually tells you how to do that. And so I'm gonna give you an easy way to be able to get into this back glute so that you don't struggle with it ever again. I like to think about it as pinching the hip. Okay, and what I mean by this is there's this diagonal line right here in between your thigh and your abs. And here, you can just pinch it, okay? And now what you do, if you have like a pen or something and you put it here, you should be able to hold it and it shouldn't fall out, okay? Now, when you get this pinch, you just need to get into this position, right, in the pitching delivery, and you're automatically gonna be in your back glute. So it'll look something like this. So you're gonna be leg lift and then pinch, okay? You're getting that pinch, and now you know that you're not gonna be loading into the quad because you can't get this pinch and load into the quad at the same time, okay? When you're getting this pinch, it's gonna counter rotate your pelvis, it's gonna get you into the glute, right? Put you in a really good position to be able to get down the mound and then unload at full play. Okay, so this is what we incorporated with one of our athletes called Brody, okay? And he had a big tendency of diving into the quad. He would just load straight into the quad, okay? This was causing all sorts of issues down the line. And one of the biggest things that it was causing was that he would just open up way too quickly, right? With his lower body and his upper half. So the shape that he was creating was more like this, rather than staying counter-rotated and going down him out like this. Now, once we incorporated more of the back hip pinch, right, and we got more into the glute, a lot of this cleaned up really quickly. And so now he was here and he'll float down the mound like this, right? He is counter-rotated, he's in his glute, he's in a really good position to fire, rather than everything going too quickly because he's getting into the quad. So now we know we need an impulse from the back leg and we need to get into this back hip rather than the quad. Now let's talk about how the back leg shape should be. And in my mind, there are three big ones that I think about. So the first one is called an L-shaped delivery. And this is basically when you leg lift and then you create an L shape, right? So you go down and then out. Some people might call it the drop and drive delivery. The other one, I call it the diagonal delivery. We talked about it with one of our athletes, was leg lift and just fold, right? There was nothing coming from the back leg. And the last one, which is the most ideal scenario, right, is when we leg lift, we drift slightly to set ourselves up and our cerebral mass is going a little bit forward. And now we can get that impulse. And it's actually more of like a curve, right? Rather than an L shape, it's more of like a curve where we're still going toward the target at all times. And as we're drifting, right, this is gonna create a lot of Y force going that way, which is exactly what we want, right? And so that's what we're creating during the drift. And now you drop into the back leg, okay? And now this is gonna create a lot of ground reaction forces where a lot of forces going into the ground, which is gonna propel you forward, okay? And so to summarize, you don't wanna have an L shape where you're here and then out. You don't wanna have a diagonal delivery where you're here. You want the best of both worlds, where you're drifting, ground reaction force, and then that'll propel you forward. This is something that I have been working on for my own training. So when I was getting up into the mid-90s, all I did was that L-shaped delivery, right? I never drifted, I never liked the drift. So all I would do was load into my back leg as much as possible, right? And I would just drop into it super deep. And there's video of me where I'm loading into my back leg and I'm getting super deep. It's crazy. It's like lower than parallel I was getting. And then I would just power myself out of that, okay? But what this led to was a lot of back pain because it was a very stressful position to get into every single time. It took a lot of effort, right? Because it was basically a single leg squat into like a jump out of it. And so now what I'm working on is more of that smooth curve, right? Where I'm drifting, putting more force into the Y direction, and then I can get into my back leg. It's an impulse where it propels me forward and I get more out of my back leg. So up until this point, we were talking about how we're trying to get more linear momentum, right? Put more force into the ground, put more Y force, X force to be able to get more linear momentum, right? But another big piece of the back leg is rotation, because you can create all the linear momentum you want, but if you're not able to rotate into foot plant and get into this position where your pelvis is open at foot plant, then it all goes to waste, okay? And so that's what I want to talk about now, is how you want to actually create rotation with the back leg. And I'm going to give you two scenarios. For me and higher level guys, I don't even like to think about rotation. If you feel your hips rotating, that is probably too slow, because this is such a violent, explosive movement that should happen in milliseconds, right? And so you shouldn't even be able to feel it. And that's why I like to think about it more of a weight shift, okay? So when we're putting a lot of force into the ground, into the Y direction, into the X direction, right? Then a lot of our weight is on our back leg, right? And then once we get that impulse and it propels us forward, now all we need to think about is get to the front leg, okay? Get to the front leg. And naturally,
just by this ground force propelling you, it's gonna rotate the hips into a foot plant. Okay, and for a lot of our high level guys, this helps them tremendously because they don't have to think about, oh, I need to rotate my hips, because that can mess you up, right? Now all you need to think about is, all right, ground reaction force to get to the front leg. And this is automatically gonna help your pelvis rotate. Now, when you weight shift from the back leg to the front leg, right, what this does is it probably opens your pelvis like halfway. A good general rule is the back leg is gonna be responsible for half of this pelvis rotation, right? And the other half is the front leg doing its thing, right? It's gonna pop it open, and now you create that hip to shoulder separation. That's my favorite way of creating rotation from the back leg. Now, if you're someone who has trouble with that and you're weight shifting, but your pelvis is still closed at foot plant, then you might need to take a little bit more of a different approach. And one of my favorite ways to approach this is to corkscrew and rotate down into foot plant, okay? So we're getting this impulse, right? And instead of just thinking the weight shift, because for some of our guys, especially guys who throw 90 miles an hour and below, a lot of the guys have trouble with this to actually rotate their hips. So they actually have to think about actively getting their hips open, right? And so the biggest thing I like to think about with this is to rotate down into foot plant, okay? So what this should look like is leg lift, impulse. You're still putting a lot of force into the ground, and then now you wanna rotate down into foot plant, okay? And this should be an extremely explosive thing. Just as a caveat, this should be more like something that you do in drills, okay? You can't be on the mound thinking, oh, I'm gonna rotate down the mound, because it's gonna be very difficult. So those are the two ways I think about getting rotation out of your back leg, okay? The weight shift and then the corkscrew down into the front leg, right? And those are two ways to do it, and you would experiment with both of them, most likely during the drills, so that you can ingrain them so that it becomes a subconscious action. And so to summarize, with the back leg, what we want to do, studies have shown that the best back legs are putting the most force into the Y direction and the Z direction, okay? Towards second base and into the ground. So we want to put a lot of force into the ground. But we don't want to do it by getting into the quad. We need to do it by getting into the hip, okay? And getting into the glute. Now, when we get into the glute, what we can do here is now we can get that impulse, right? We're going to put a lot of force into the ground. The ground is going to push us up and it's going to propel us forward. And then we can get that rotational aspect either just by thinking about weight shift and getting to the front leg, or we can think about corkscrewing down into our front leg. Okay, so if you need help gaining pitching velocity and improving your back leg, you can book a call down below with me and we can talk about how we can help you do just that.